Thank you. Well, I'm excited to be here and I love teaching this stuff because I know that it is such a challenge. No matter what stage of your career you are at, whether you are just starting and you're creating, your first portfolio, or whether you are trying to figure out how do I take 20 years of experience and put it into a portfolio. The task of telling the story of what you've worked on, your skills, experience, etc. It's a tricky one. So hopefully today, you will be able to maybe make some changes in real time, or at least have a really good blueprint of how to go back and improve your portfolio in the days and weeks to come. So we're going to move pretty quickly, but this should be pretty easy to follow along because we have kind of an activity midway through. So first of all, I want to kind of get a lay of the land here and see if this use case essentially sounds familiar. And you can see my screen, right? It says, does this sound familiar? Okay, just checking that. All right, so sound familiar. You have to create a portfolio and you think to yourself, I got to go to Google, right? And it's not just your portfolio. This could be your resume, preparing for an interview, cover letter, how to optimize your LinkedIn. Your default is really to go to Google for a lot of this. And then you're given all these options. And then you end up in a situation that looks something like this, right? Where it's kind of this chaotic mess of visits to various websites and long form content, short form content, user generated content. And one of the problems with this is that you are in information gathering mode. And then a lot of times this information, it conflicts and you're super confused, right? Because you aren't really sure who or what to believe. And it feels like you're kind of on this hamster wheel of information gathering. And this person, I love to show little examples in the middle of my slides here. So this person, Cheryl, she'd said, I've been dragging my feet for years on building a portfolio. I really need to get started. I also open up a file, start to go through my work, take screenshots and photos, come back later and not at all, delete everything because I think my work isn't good enough. And I'm guessing some of you are in a situation very similar to that, either right now, or maybe that was something that happened to you in the future. So let's look at what's really happening here, because a lot of us are UX people, and part of UX is understanding the context and the details of what's really going on below the surface. So for many of you, your job search expectation is like this, right? You think you are going to take a few months to get hired. Now, maybe we need to adjust this because of the job market right now, but still, general kind of point here is you think getting hired will eventually happen for you. In reality, it's more like this, right? It takes a lot longer than you thought. There's a lot more ups and downs that are happening. And for some people who email me and tell me about their job search, they're saying they've applied to 100, 200, 300 or more jobs. And stories like that really motivate me to help people get unstuck from that, because I believe it doesn't have to be that hard if we look at the variables that you can control in your job search and not focus on the variables that are totally out of your control. So how does this scenario happen, right? This is why you're stuck in your job search, because you see a role that's interesting to you, and then you think, this is perfect, I'm going to apply. And then you instantly essentially start to freak out because you think, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. My portfolio's out of date, my LinkedIn's out of date, my resume, et cetera, et cetera. And then the tricky part is you rush into updating all of that stuff. And when you rush, you're prone to make a lot of mistakes, right? Just by nature. And your confidence kind of starts to go down because you thought you were ready. And then the deeper you get into making of all these what I call career materials, like marketing materials for your career, resume, portfolio, etc., then you doubt yourself. And then that's when your confidence starts to kind of tank, essentially. And then this process repeats itself, right? You're kind of in this roller coaster of, okay, I think I'm doing great. And then you compare your portfolio or resume to someone else. And then you think, no, it's horrible. And then you read new advice online and you try and implement that. And it goes over and over. And then at the end of this diagram is the trash can, where maybe many of you have experienced. You just trash it and start over. And this is not sustainable, and it does not have to be this hard. So hopefully, with these tips I'm going to give you, we can completely avoid this and have a more streamlined, less chaotic, less emotional job search. So we know you want to create a portfolio that helps you get interviews, get opportunities, more inbounds from LinkedIn, etc., with a lot less stress. And you've tried doing all this on your own. And I think too, you see a lot of comments and articles about imposter syndrome and confidence and things like that. And I think a lot of this comes from this cycle that we just saw, where you get caught in overthinking, second guessing, etc. So with what we're going to learn today, hopefully we can put an end, or at least turn down the volume on some of that imposter syndrome, etc. So I'm going to skip over a little blurb about me, because Larry did a great job of introducing me. But before we get into the portfolio tips, I want to give you a 3-minute backstory on my career, because this will show you the power of having an awesome portfolio. So, for mid 2000s, I was actually living in Portland, Oregon, and I was working at a cushy job, let's say, at the time, given my age and experience, at a large software company in their marketing department. But I knew I wanted to be more in user experience. We didn't even call it that back at the time, but my eyes had been open to this kind of world of, at the time, really information architecture. But there was this problem where I wanted to leave this corporate job. And so I was freelancing at night, and I literally worked in the library at my lunch break to work on projects and stuff. And then I started to see jobs for information architects, and I realized, oh, I don't have a portfolio. I guess I need one. So I started working on a portfolio, and way back then, we had these literal metal binders where we printed out projects and assembled them. Maybe some of you did this too. And we take these to interviews, and it was just literally a photo album of deliverables. No story, nothing, even throw in some logos there. And the problem was, I was getting interviews, but I wasn't getting job offers. In hindsight, it was because of that portfolio and a lot of problems that portfolio was making. So I realized I needed to go back to the drawing board. And just looking at this timeline, we're going to fast forward to about May 2007. I decided to actually think about some real strategy for my portfolio, so it wasn't just a bunch of visuals. And 2 months later, I was hired as the director of user experience for a startup in New York City. And I had never been to New York City, but I moved across the country and did that. So, point being, in 2 months, I totally kind of turned everything around, made that portfolio, was able to get interviews, and got the job offer. So I want you to keep that timeline in mind, because this does not have to be a 12-month activity or something. We're talking weeks to a couple of months for you. And the cool thing about that portfolio is that if we look at this timeline really quick, that was in 2007, where I turned around my portfolio, moved to New York City. And I really believe these are not all of my career highlights. These are just some. But the point I'm trying to make is, if I had not doubled down and created a portfolio that worked and applied real UX to that actual portfolio, many cool things would not have happened in my career. I probably wouldn't have moved to New York. I probably would not have started, probably because I didn't have the confidence, I would not have been writing articles, and then those articles led to visibility, which is how General Assembly ever heard about me. And because someone saw I was doing stuff with General Assembly, I was invited to kind of be interviewed for a thing in the New York Times. And then I started this YouTube channel, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that portfolio really gave me the storytelling skills, awesome strategy skills, and I think the confidence to really put myself out there and have a lot of cool things come to me, or cause me to hit publish on that blog post, for example. So what we're going to do is 6 ways to create an awesome first impression with your portfolio, to actually show your process and skills, telling that story, which we see all the time. Everyone says, tell a story, tell a story. No one really tells you how to tell a story. And then as a result, you're going to be able to stand out from other candidates. And major bonus point here, when you have a portfolio that does all these things, by default, you are going to be far more prepared and confident to talk about your projects that you worked on in interviews, because you did the work to think through that story and write it down and put it into your portfolio. So this workshop is structured into 6 questions that I'm going to ask you. And these questions can really be used to evaluate your own portfolio. And I'm just going to quit I just had to change a setting on my screen because it's getting so late. It was going into like blue light mode. All right. So I encourage you to grab a piece of paper, divide it up like this, because I'm going to give you a way to kind of take notes to hopefully make sure you take action after this. So question number 1, when you're thinking about your portfolio, can you articulate who you are as a UX or product professional in your portfolio? So your portfolio needs to kind of have a tagline or elevator pitch for you, right? Similar to a product. That's what helps people understand what the product or service does, and sometimes helps that product or service be memorable. So we need that for you, or I often say the product of you. And this is going to help communicate your unique skills and talents, experience differentiators from other candidates, so you don't sound like everyone else. So let's look at an example. We have, hello, I'm Anna, just random Anna. I'm a UX designer, and I want to make products that people love. Now, this is not good. This is super generic, and there's a lot of problems with this. It sounds like so many other people's portfolios, right? UX designer, first of all. Well, what does that actually mean? Does Anna do research? Does Anna do design systems? Does Anna do product strategy? We don't know, because she has used this generic kind of title, I guess, of UX designer. So we're not really sure exactly what Anna does. And recruiters and hiring managers, when we put ourselves in their shoes, this generic kind of boilerplate statement of, I'm a UX designer, I want to make products that people love or change the world or blah, blah, blah. If you put that into Google, as I did, you're going to get a lot of portfolio websites, LinkedIn profiles, et cetera, that all have a variation of that. And when you're a recruiter or hiring manager and you read that over and over every single day, everything is the same. And so no one stands out, because everyone is describing themselves in this very almost like Mad Libs style elevator pitch. So how do we make it better? Something like this. I'm Anna. I'm a senior user researcher and experience designer with 15 years of working in e-commerce and healthcare. I'm an expert at educating stakeholders and colleagues about the value of design. So this is so much better, because now we know, aha, Anna doesn't just do UX design, she also does research and experience design. Great. And Anna's not just starting out. Anna is a senior with 15 years of experience, tells us about these industries of e-commerce and healthcare. And this last sentence, telling us a few little unique things about her. She's this educating stakeholders and colleagues about the value of design. So before and after, this was our before. You guys are not going to do this. And this one is so much better. So if yours sounds kind of generic, want to make products people love, change the world, etc., we want to make it more specific to something like this. So it's unique so that when the recruiters and hiring managers read it, you actually stand out. So on your piece of paper, if you did this, you take notes however you want, but it could be useful to just give yourself a quick grade. Does your about me statement need work? Do you think it's good? Or is it almost matching the level of detail of this? So that's how we're going to go through these questions. So I'll give you a second to write your answer down, or if you want to screenshot this for later, go ahead. But we need that unique about me statement that's going to help you stand out and not sound like everyone else. And then it'll look like this. All right, question number 2, though. Does each project in your portfolio have an accompanying story that I can tell, right? Because you see it all day on LinkedIn, tell a story, tell a story. And we don't want to have a portfolio like my portfolio that was just a bunch of screenshots of deliverables, because your portfolio isn't an art project, right? And that whole kind of phrase of a portfolio or a picture is not worth 1,000 words. We need to take time to tell that story. We can't expect the final deliverables or visuals to stand alone. So we need to show the process. So let's pretend for the purposes of this workshop, we're talking about a portfolio that is a presentation or PDF. If your portfolio is a website, use your imagination and all these tips will still apply. But imagine right now we're looking at 2 slides from a portfolio presentation. Some user flows on the left, and that text, it says user flow of the customer experience. And then we have these high fidelity designs. It says high fidelity designs for the prototype. The problem here is that the focus is really on the deliverables, and these titles at the top of these slides, they're frankly just stating the obvious. So how can we tell more of a story about what we're actually looking at? So we're going to zoom in to this one on the left where it's this mobile app and the screens are kind of connected through lines and stuff. So instead of it saying user flow of the customer experience, what if we told the reader / user of the portfolio a little bit more, like more about the user who is involved in this use case? And yes, we're looking at this kind of in isolation, and there would have been more slides before this, but let's look at the top. So we have a little photo of a user, in this case, Jenny, and we're explaining the scenario. Well, Jenny's son is missing at an amusement park and uses the app to report him as missing. And this walks us through that user flow, and it's kind of color coordinated. It's showing, okay, this red thing, you click this and you go here, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to go through it all. And then down here, we have this other user involved in this, and it says Kelly is at Disney and receives an alert on her phone. Well, now we know what we're looking at, right? Versus if we only do something like this, and it just says user flow of the customer experience, we don't know any of that stuff about Jenny and her son's missing and all that, because it wasn't there. So that's what we mean when we say we want to have more story involved in what we are showing, so people know what the heck they're looking at. And then quickly, small side tangent here. When we're thinking about kind of the anatomy of just one project in your portfolio presentation, I think of each project covering these slides. This does not mean only kind of one slide for each of these. It could be more, it could be less, but at minimum, we need a kind of a title slide for the project. We need an overview slide, maybe multiple, depending on how complex it is. I'm a fan of having a timeline for each project to kind of show us what happened, the steps or milestones or phases of the project. That might even also help communicate collaboration with other teams and things like that. And then the process, which is really going to end up being the bulk of the case study in your portfolio, which is why there's kind of meant to show multiple slides underneath it. And then some type of conclusion, lessons learned, etc. And that title slide, this is where kind of the story comes in. We really want to be communicating context and details so that if a recruiter or hiring manager is going through this on their own without you there in the interview with them, they can understand, like, who was the client and company, what was the problem, what was the goal, what was kind of the current state of the union there, what was your role, timeline, we talked about that, team, even things like, was it remote, was it in person? All those things are really important to communicate because it helps convey the experience that you have, which hopefully is the experience they are looking for. All right, so we need to make sure that the text that is in your portfolio is actually explaining what people are looking at or explaining your process. And we'll see a few more examples of this afterwards. But what we want to avoid is just stuff like, here is a user flow. Here are some high fidelity designs. It's like, obviously that's what we're looking at, but help me understand what exactly I am looking at. So you can evaluate yourself on if you think maybe you need to go back and do some writing to get a little bit more specific about the slides in your portfolio. All right, question 3. Do the images, visuals in your portfolio, do they really provide value here? Or are they essentially more of a distraction, or honestly, in some cases, a decoration? So we want to make sure that every visual that we include in our portfolio has a purpose, is actually legible, and that we explain what we are looking at. And I'll give you some tips too of how you can get creative with this, because I know a lot of you work on these deliverables like a giant journey map, and when you smush it down onto a slide, you're like, how is anyone going to read that? It's so small. Or you worked on a mobile app and it's this long scrolling thing. How do you make that fit inside your portfolio in a way that is actually legible? So hang tight, we will see. All right, so first of all, here's an example of what we're not going to do. So this is a wireframe for this, what was it? Financial thing I worked on years ago, probably over 15 years ago. And we're going to imagine we're looking at a slide in someone's portfolio. So imagine it's my portfolio and I have my beautiful wireframe over at the right. It's like this dashboard. It doesn't really matter. And the text in my portfolio says, next I made some wireframes. We do not want to do this. We do not want to be stating the obvious with the text in our portfolio. It's like, yes, I know that's a wireframe, but I want to know, what am I looking at? So how are we going to improve this? We're going to step through various improvements. One way to improve it is to literally give it a title. So page, customer dashboard. Now we know what we're looking at, right? And this is all about layering in context to help the user / reader know what they're looking at. So title, and then some text. Here is the wireframe of the customer dashboard. This is where account managers can see the details about each customer and browse between different customers. Great. Now we know what we're looking at. And even though I'm seeing this for the first time, because we're using helpful, specific text, we know what we're looking at. We get the gist, right? That's what we want. We don't expect the people looking at our portfolio to know exactly what's going on in every part of this wireframe. We want them to know the gist of it. But how can we make this better? Well, maybe we add an element of like problem and solution here, right? Because part of this project was showing people how this wireframe solved a specific problem, which was, or at the left, this is a bunch of customers. And so navigating between customers used to involve going between 2 pages, kind of like email, right? Like you click on a message, you go to the detail, back, forth, back, forth. So we wanted to solve that problem and avoid the back and forth. So the solution was to add a left customer navigation to the dashboard that allowed account managers to see everything on one screen. Great. Now, how can we make this even better? Because if the kind of the part of the wireframe that is really the solution is this left bar here, when we look at it, it's kind of hard to see in the wireframe, right? So here's what we can do. And I'll talk you through what changed here. We still have our wireframe. It's kind of like grayed out with a bit of opacity there. But because I want the solution to really stand out, I kind of outlined it on the wireframe and then I blew it up at the right. This allows me to really like get to the guts of the wireframe that I want to really show off as the solution. And so we still have our problem and solution. We have the problem up here, talking about the left navigation. And then I just do some simple annotating to show, okay, in this left bar, to make it really easy for people to find customers, we had a search and you could click on the row and then it expanded, and we're not going to go through all the details, etc. But this is what you want to do if you want to stand out, because I promise you, if you take the time to do this level of detail, you will stand out, because so many candidates do not do this. And I know this because number one, I do a lot of career coaching and I see the before version of people's portfolios, but I've also done hiring in the past. Companies have hired me to help them fill roles, and I have reviewed 1, 2, 3, 400 applications, and I can't tell you the exact percent. Well, let's just say anecdotally, if you do this, you will stand out. So that's what we mean when we say, how can we include visuals in a way that is going to be really impactful? And those changes that we just went through, even if you're a researcher or even if you're a UX writer, you don't have to be a like designer with 20 years of experience to do what we did. You just need to be really strategic so that you're not just dumping wireframes or user flows on screens and saying, here's the wireframe, but you're adding that detail to let people know, what am I looking at? What was the problem? What was the solution? And then, in the case of this, showing me the specific parts of that solution. So I want you to think about, do the images in your portfolio have enough context? Have you taken the time to point out the details? Or are you just using generic labels that are stating the obvious, like, here are personas, here is a sitemap, here is a whatever the deliverable is. So take time to think about that next time you work on your portfolio. Question number 4. All right. Did you take time to curate the projects for the specific role that you're applying to? So you've probably seen online people saying you should customize your portfolio for each role. And I'm going to tell you exactly how you can do that, because I really believe that a portfolio shouldn't be one size fits all. And if you think of the experiences that we work on, we try and tailor it to the user, right? Like if you've ever worked on, I don't know, a finance product or a banking product or a healthcare product or some fitness product, the ones that even just like you use in your daily life, you probably find the ones that are really tailored to you the most valuable. And so for your portfolio, if we tailor it to the role that we're applying to, that's going to help you stand out. This does not have to mean that you're going to make a brand new portfolio from scratch every single time. We're really talking about very simple things that we can do to tweak it, honestly, possibly in less than an hour. So how are we going to do that though? First of all, you need to have what we'll call kind of a baseline portfolio. And over the left, that baseline portfolio, let's imagine it's a Keynote file just for simplicity. That might have 6 projects in it. It's all the possible projects that you could feature in your portfolio. But when you apply to a job, now we're over here at the right, when you apply to the job, maybe you're only including 3 of those 6 projects. So that's just one idea of how you could customize your portfolio for each job you apply to. Now let's look at kind of a situation here. So let's imagine you're applying for a job, a research job, and the job description mentions things like user research, quant and qual. It's also in the e-commerce industry, and they want some healthcare experience for whatever reason. So you have these 6 projects, and I'm not going to read every single one, but if we're thinking about which ones we would include, it's just a process of matching up the ones in your baseline portfolio, which is these 6, to what is mentioned in the job description. So because we have one project that's all about usability testing for e-commerce, that's going to go in it. Check mark on that one. This next one was an interactive prototype for a telehealth service. So check mark, we're going to include that. Then projects 3 and 4, they're kind of quant and qual research, so we'll include those. But project 5 and 6, project 5 is about UX writing, and project 6 is about facilitating a design sprint workshop. Now, maybe you did great work, I'm sure you did, but when it comes to the job you're applying to, doesn't exactly line up with what they're looking for. And the takeaway here is that the more projects you put in your portfolio, especially if they don't align with what is in the job description, you will risk that you're really diluting your experience, or you're diluting the message you're sending, and you're diluting the focus that you want that recruiter or hiring manager to have, right? Because if we're applying for a job and we put all 6 of these projects, kind of a distraction to put this UX writing one and the design sprint one in, versus if we only include those 4 that really align with what was over here, that really matches up with what they are looking for. So a couple of other tips of how you can tailor your portfolio beyond just matching up the projects. It could be as simple as reordering the projects. Maybe project 4 is super relevant to the job that you're applying to. You can move that up to be the first project in your portfolio instead of kind of saving the best for last, so to speak, right? You could also be slightly just renaming the titles of projects in your portfolio so they use literally words, phrases, etc. from the job description, so that as a recruiter or hiring manager is kind of skimming and scanning through, they're seeing, okay, in this title, I see this, and that was in the job description, and they're having more confidence in your skills and experience just by glancing through those titles. All right, so for jobs you've applied to in the past, or maybe you're applying to one right now, think about, have you been customizing and curating the projects, tailoring your portfolio, or have you not? So something to think about. All right, question 5. Do the images show the process and not just the final product? So many of you love to show the final deliverables, which is great, but recruiters and hiring managers want to know how you arrived at that. It's like when you were in elementary school and your teacher said, show your work on the math test, right? They want to know how you arrived at that solution. Same thing applies 20 years, 30 years later when we're applying for jobs and making a portfolio. So we need to show our work. Now I'll show you how we can do that, but a challenge that often comes up is, well, I'd love to show my work, but I don't have any of those assets. Well, lesson learned, now's the time to start keeping a folder or some system where you can just be saving off iterations, versions, sketches, whatever it is that you do, so that when it does come time to add that project to your portfolio, you have some of that stuff. All right, now, what does it mean to show the process visually? So maybe in this case, this was a mobile app. Same thing as we saw before about the child using the app and the parents finding the child who's lost at the amusement park. Well, instead of just having a picture of a storyboard like this and saying like, next I made a storyboard. Well, that's nice, but it's a little dark and I don't really know what I'm looking at because again, no titles, no labels, no explanations, etc. It would be a lot clearer if we did something like this. You're kind of chopping up the storyboard into scenes essentially, and you're telling us what's happening. It's kind of like if you were going to talk through this storyboard in an interview or in a meeting with your team, this is kind of how you would do it. And that's what you could also do in your portfolio. So, and also having a sentence at the top, I call these headlines. Same thing from advertising, right? Like really great ads, print ads, especially from back in the day. They are anchored on awesome headlines. And so the same thing applies to your portfolio slides. A storyboard helped identify 5 key moments in the scenario of a child going missing at an amusement park. I got it. If I'm busy, I'm kind of skimming this, I understand. Versus this, I don't have a clue what I'm looking at. I'm just like, there's some sketches and people, maybe a roller coaster, I don't even know. So we don't want to do this. Next, personas. A lot of people just kind of paste a persona document on there and have a title up here that just says, next I made personas. Okay, great. But it's nice to contextualize these personas a little bit. I don't need to see those documents that sometimes we see people make where it says like they like to eat at this restaurant, have a dog, and et cetera, like the demographic type stuff. I want to have a better understanding of who is involved in this experience, in this case, this mobile app, kind of the characters, if you will. And then if I have time, I might read that text. All right, then notice what we're doing too. We're showing the process. We're going from storyboards to users to now user flows, low fidelity. And I'm not just including this image at the right all by itself. I'm saying I mapped out key user flows and I'm listing out some of the user flows there. Then we get into lower fidelity screens, helped make this MVP. And we are explaining a little bit about the MVP over there. And then we get into high fidelity designs. And instead of just having high fidelity designs with no text, we're explaining key user flows, and we're kind of grouping high fidelity designs in the user flows that they belong to. Because what recruiters and hiring managers don't want to see is kind of a screenshot of your Figma file with 80 little screens and they can't see what's going on. It's better to go for depth, like what we're seeing here, on a couple of user flows than to try and just show me, oh, this Figma file zoomed out to show me 80, 100 screens, whatever it is. So the challenge really for you is to think about what were some of the most complex, troublesome, important user flows to this product and walk me through those. So we're doing that with this. We're saying the experience a park goer has if a child goes missing at the amusement park. So I'm setting up what I'm looking at. I'm including those users that we were introduced to back here. So takeaway, carry your users through your portfolio with you. It's going to help humanize this and make it easier for people to follow along with. So we're not going to go through all the details of this, but it's showing this is what the kind of amusement park visitor sees when a child is missing. And then they click this and they see details about the kid. And there's the photo tab and the detail tab, blah, blah, blah. And then we show a little bit what we do not want to do. So this is what we don't want to do, because it's like, yes, I know that's visual design, but I don't know what I'm looking at. This is a lot better than this. So question for you, are you truly showing your process for each project, right? Are you walking people through what you did? Or are you just dumping final deliverables on and trying to show off, polished designs? Polished designs are great, but you need to show your work. All right, and question number 6, did I limit myself to only projects that launched or end-to-end projects? And I wanted to include this question because there is this myth out there that you can only include projects that launched, and you can only include kind of start to finish projects, like from concept to completion. And I don't believe that. And after all the conversations I've had with hiring managers, that is not the trend that I'm hearing from them. So it's okay to include these projects that didn't launch, and it's okay to only include part of a project. So let's talk about the projects that didn't launch for a second. There's so many reasons that projects don't launch, and it's not your fault. It doesn't make you a bad, designer, a bad researcher, a bad writer. It just means that it got chopped, and it's not your fault. So don't take it personally and don't feel like you can't include it. And if someone doesn't like that, maybe you don't want to work for that person to begin with. It could be a yellow flag about their culture. And if they do ask about it in an interview, just have an answer, a one-sentence answer. Oh, well, that project was deprioritized. I'm not really sure why. It just happened, but don't throw people under the bus and get like nasty about it. That would not be a good look. I've heard that happen before. Just answer in one sentence diplomatically about what happened. And if you don't know, you don't know, right? You could have just showed up to work one day and the project was canceled. The other thing I want to just go into really quickly here is many of you feel like you can't include a project because, for example, well, we didn't do research, so I can't include this project. And you have this idea that it must cover, the quote, perfect UX process, which there is no perfect UX process because it changes depending on the time, budget, etc. So instead, even if you do have a project that went through all of these beautiful linear steps, it would be perfectly acceptable to only focus on the research part of that project, or only focus on the product strategy part of that project, or maybe you group them together. And even though this was all part of one project you did in your job, by putting these two kind of as one project in your portfolio and these two in another project in your portfolio, now all of a sudden in your portfolio, you have 2 projects instead of 1. So if you're earlier in your career and you're worried, well, I only have 1 or 2 projects, you might be able to really end up with 4 in your portfolio if you kind of don't try and include everything in one case study, but break it up into maybe just research or research and strategy or experience design and testing, however you slice it. But essentially, permission to break up your projects into multiple projects. This is also a great tip if you've worked on really big projects and you don't know how to deal with something that you worked on for, say, 3 years, which I hear all the time. All right, so reflection for you is, if you only included projects that launched and you excluded other projects that maybe didn't launch because you thought, well, that's the rule, I guess I can't include them, maybe you can go back and realize there's projects that you could include. And we have a bonus question, but I need to take a sip. I've had a lot of calls today. All right, bonus question, because I know this will come up in any Q&A we might have time to get to. Did I sell myself short by choosing the wrong medium or format for my portfolio? So I'm asked the question all the time, what format should my portfolio be? Everyone says it should be a website for XYZ reasons. And after doing this since 2017, when I pivoted my own career totally unexpectedly into this world of helping people with portfolios and now resumes and portfolios and everything, there is, or let me take a step back. The feedback I've heard over and over and over from candidates is, I've been trying to make my portfolio as a website and it's taking a lot longer than I imagined. Or I decided it would be a good time to learn to code to make my portfolio a website. And then I look at their portfolio and it's honestly terrible because, like, why try and learn to code for a really important asset in your career, your portfolio, right? So don't dilute or risk the message that you're trying to communicate by potentially choosing the wrong medium. So we have a few little examples here. I want you to consider this as your permission to not feel like your portfolio must be a website because random people said that on LinkedIn, probably to get clicks to stuff. And consider, why can't it be a PDF? Why can't it be a presentation? One piece of pushback I often receive is that, well, on the job applications, it says link to portfolio. Guess what that means? It just means whoever made that form, probably a developer, didn't update that text on the form to say anything else than link to portfolio. And so UX people then take that literally to mean, well, it says link to portfolio must mean it has to be a website. If it's a presentation, just put the PDF on the cloud and drop the link right there. Problem solved. So a couple of things to get you thinking. Pros and cons of PDF versus website really comes down to 4 things: time, cost, customization, and interview readiness. I think PDF is superior. It's going to be faster. It's cheaper. You can customize the PDF versus if you're trying to customize your website for every role to apply to, technically it's possible, but that's a lot of customization. You might need to make logins for people, and it probably is going to be a nightmare. More importantly, interview readiness. If you make your portfolio as a website, you kind of have to think ahead and think, okay, if I start to get interviews, what am I going to show? And I think it's a weird experience if you go to an interview and pull up a website and start scrolling through it. I think a lot of people realize after they make a website, oh man, now I need a presentation for my interviews. So why not kind of just have a PDF that can serve both purposes? You use the same PDF when you apply for a job and the same one in an interview. And I've had so many people do exactly that and get the interviews and get the job offers. Some of them take time to maybe reduce the amount of text in the one they take to interviews, but many don't, and they still do just fine. So for you, I would say, do you need to rethink the format of your portfolio? If you've been struggling with trying to learn Squarespace or WordPress or learn to code or whatever it is, maybe there might be worth a little exercise of thinking about kind of the strategy of the pros and cons of a PDF, right? So those are our, I guess, 7 questions, which I hope give you some really actionable things that you can do to change, improve your portfolio so that either you make it right the first time, or if you're applying and not getting interviews, you can make these changes and hopefully start to get some interviews. In the spirit of time, I'm just going to skip over our recap because it kind of is a little bit redundant to what we did. But I'm curious in the chat, what is your number 1 takeaway? Is there one question that you think, oh my goodness, this one is just glaring, I know I need to fix this? So I want to pull up the chat and see, because it's been hidden behind all the Zoom windows here.
Well, I'll mention we have about 6 questions lurking throughout the chat here. So whenever you're ready, I can
I'm ready, and we
repeat
can just
those back to you. But your number 1
I'm ready,
takeaway
and we
question
can just
should come first.
Yeah, let me know what question should come first.
I'll tell you what, I'll fire a question at Sarah while you guys are writing down your number one takeaway in the chat. How would that be?
Sounds
Okay. So I'm just going back in time here. Hang on.
good.
Way back in time. All right. First question is, this is from Mehdi, and I'm going to ask it. If I've screwed it up, jump in and reframe it. And I want to make sure I understood the question. You wrote, is it possible to show slides or examples at the same time as explanations? Was that a question to Sarah about her presentation, or a question for you about when you're presenting your work? So Mehdi, will let you jump in and answer that and clarify. Or not.
If you're still here.
Yeah, maybe not. All right, maybe not. Let's go with Riley's question. Riley wants to know, if you ignore that last bit of advice and do a website instead of a PDF, should you create a separate subdomain for every job application, so you're assured that the hiring managers are just looking at the custom site you built for them? Or do you want to just say, don't even bother with that?
I mean, you could. It's really personal preference here. If that is easy for you in whatever tool you use and your kind of technical competency, that could be possible. But I think the main thing to think about is, how do you reduce the friction that is put in front of recruiters and hiring managers to see your work? And I cannot tell you how many times I see on LinkedIn recruiters and hiring managers saying, like, mistakes I've seen from candidates this week: links to portfolios with no password given or wrong password, etc. And so just make sure you're not adding friction for them. And then, like I said, you have to think ahead, and you really have to put on a product manager hat here and think, okay, if I know once I do get interviews, I'm going to have to probably show something in an interview at some point, especially if you don't already have a website, I think do the PDF first, because that can serve those two purposes. So hopefully that answers your question. I have a whole article about this, Larry. I can email you links to some articles after, so you could put them in like the recap email of this.
Perfect.
Cool, because there's a detailed one about that question.
And Amanda's question was very related to this. She wants to know, what is the best process to curate a portfolio when we're using websites rather than PowerPoint or PDFs? I think you've answered it, but do you want to add anything?
I mean, I have not gone down the rabbit hole of how you would actually execute that, because I just think the PDF is easier, to be honest. But I guess that subdomain would be one way to do it. I guess another way would be to make, like, somehow make logins or something for your website, or maybe you make like yourname.com/Amazon, and then on that page it's kind of like a table of contents that just links to the projects that are related to the Amazon job you're applying to. You know, there's different ways you could achieve it, but you really just have to be thinking of what is the most frictionless way to do it, and you have to think of time it will take you to do that. The other thing you have to consider too, I know NDAs come up oftentimes when I talk about portfolios, and one of the reasons that I'm really an advocate of a PDF is that, and obviously it depends on each company's NDA, but some companies might be okay with you having work in a PDF versus not okay with having it on a website, because when it is on a website, it can end up being indexed by the search engines, and anyone can find it if you don't have the right settings, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's something else to think about also concerning this question of PDF versus website.
And you also just answered the NDA question that was coming up here.
Awesome.
Um, Anais and Anne, who are two different people,
Mhm.
want to know how do you assess when work is too old or just visually feels a little from another era? You know,
Yeah.
how do you know when to cut that off?
Yeah. So
Mhm.
I think it's a little more applicable to people who are more on the literal design side of things and the interface design side of things, right? Because we can see designs kind of get dated, right? So I think it's something to be more mindful of for those types of roles versus I think you could have worked on a research project from 10 years ago that still could be great 20 years ago even. They could still be awesome to include because the research is pretty timeless, right? Same thing with UX writing or product strategy. I worked a person in my career coaching program, they worked on a bunch of stuff related to very early Kindle stuff. I don't even remember the details, but I remember seeing all these early Kindle things, but it was much less about the interface design of the Kindle and more about the product strategy of the Kindle and a couple of key user flows within it. And so hopefully that gives you some ideas of, where to kind of draw the line for you. But I think it is a little bit more applicable to people who are on the visual design side of things. Because if you're a visual designer, people are judging you from your visual designs. And if they see stuff like apps that were designed for the original iPhone, unfortunately, they could look at it and kind of maybe, unfortunately, have bias and think, oh, that's so old. Like, what the heck has this person been doing for the last almost 20 years? So, hopefully that gives you some clarity of how to make that decision for your projects.
How do you feel about just updating stuff? If it looks old, redesign it, make it look new.
Yeah, that could work for some projects, I think. You kind of have to be a little bit careful, but depending on what it was, it could work. I want to go back to NDAs for a second because a lot of people say like they're very concerned about the NDAs. I am not an attorney, so I'm going to say that up front, but I think people tend to take NDAs as just yes, no. And I think there are situations, especially depending on your relationship with your current or previous company or boss, to go back and clarify, is there essentially wiggle room? Like, could I show this if I blur certain sections out, if I replace it with fake content, if I redact stuff, etc.? Because you may be surprised to find that is okay. Or maybe to the point of website versus PDF, if you say, here is how I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it when I go to interviews. It's not going to be out on Behance or Dribbble or floating around the internet, coming up in search results. And so depending on your relationship with, the people at your past company, that could be worth doing rather than just making these kind of assumptions that, well, there's an NDA, can never talk about that.
Right. That's good. Thank you. You're anticipating all these
I
questions
know
really
all the
well. All right.
questions.
You want to guess? You want to guess what the next one is, or do you want me to tell you?
Let's tell me because there's so
All right.
many.
This is from Blakely. And
Okay.
Blakely, I'm going to ask you just to pop on here because your question was about NDAs, and I want to make sure we kind of hit on the aspect of it you're thinking about. There you are.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Let me get back to what question we have.
Well, you were worried about how NDAs would get very restrictive. And so my question is whether or not Sarah's answer about can you go back and do some asking and negotiating would be a solution for you.
Yeah, I think that works. It's a lot to wrap my head around, just with that back and forth. But yeah, I think that's just what I'm gonna have to do. I also think doing the deck would be a good solution to that with at least one of the companies that I'm referencing. So you pretty much got it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And, even if, I've had people work at government stuff or like, healthcare stuff, and they don't even want to mention the company. And let's say someone did a project for the Mayo Clinic or the CDC or something like that. You could still talk about that project without even mentioning it. You could say like a large national health organization or something. And there's ways that you could probably talk through the what of what you did and abstract it in ways so that you may not be mentioning that. And it may be easier if it was a research project versus you designed the CDC website. It's going to be hard because you'll want to show the CDC website. But if you're more on the research or strategy side of things, you may have a little bit more wiggle room with kind of abstracting or finding ways to abstract out what you did if it's this really, really strict NDA. Again, I'm not an attorney, so.
That was great. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. We have 3 whole minutes left.
Okay.
And there's one question I saw here that I want to know what you think about this too. This is from Ryan. Are hiring managers really reading all the content in my case studies? And my version of that question is, how much time do you think a hiring manager spends with a portfolio? And therefore, how long might a case study want to be optimally?
Yep. So here's what we need to remember. And this same advice applies to resumes, right? Because you've all seen the stat, people only spend 6 seconds with your resume, etc. If you give people a reason to spend more time on your resume and your portfolio, they will. So how are we going to do that? Well, we need to think about the content and the design of our portfolio, and like specific to portfolio. That's why if we go back here, let me find it. I briefly told you about, for example, this, having a strong headline at the top of every slide, because if we optimize for the idea that they're only going to skim, we need to design it in a way that it's totally obvious what we want them to skim. And so because this slide at the top of it has text in a larger font, that is jumping out in the hierarchy of information on this slide, which is cueing people's eyes and brains to be like, read this first, right? So even you notice, like in my slides here, what was I doing? If I sent this deck to you and you were not here on this call and you just skimmed it, you'd read that purple thing, and you would you'd be reading that. Imagine you have a baseline portfolio, etc. So are they reading every word? Maybe, maybe not. But if you make it easier for them to do so, they'll probably spend more than 6 seconds on your resume, 1 or 2 minutes on your portfolio. And the other thing we have to think about is the further you get in the interview process, there is a higher chance that they will start reading it, right? Because if you're the first person in HR who's going through 200 applicants, you're not reading all those portfolios. Like, it's just math, right? However, once it gets whittled down to 8, 10, 5, 2, those people probably are spending more time, right? Especially because the stakes are higher. Like, they want to be sinking their teeth into what you did, because if they make a wrong hire, they have to go through this whole process again. And they don't want to do that because that's a lot of time and money. So name of the game is you have to think of the user experience of all this. And that's how you're going to get people to pay attention and spend more than, 6 seconds on your resume, portfolio, etc. And even if you're a researcher, even if you're a UX writer, whatever, you don't have to like have a degree in design to do this. This is just basic stuff like hierarchy, story, etc. So essentially what we covered today. Yeah.
Fantastic. We're at time.
Yes.
And what I would ask you all to do is just put this super glowing, ultra appreciative comment in the chat. And I will use that as leverage to see if we can get Sarah to answer some of the questions we didn't get to tonight, because there were some great ones that you guys snuck in there in the takeaways section. And so it'd be fun to get those answered. But whether we do or not, boy, have I loved this. So thank you so much, Sarah. As you may have noticed, oh, I'm sorry.
I
Go
could
ahead.
stick around for probably another 5 minutes, but my voice is fading, as you may or may not be able to tell here.
No, we'll let you go, and I'll
Okay.
package up these stray questions for you. We can
Okay,
decide
got
what
it,
to
got
do
it.
with them.
Okay.
But what I wanted to say is please be sure that you follow Sarah on LinkedIn and go visit the Career Strategy Lab website and listen to the well, there, it's on your screen right now. All this
Yeah.
great stuff is out there. And we'll send you some links in a follow-up email so you don't have to screenshot this stuff. Anyway, I could listen for another 10 hours, but it's bedtime, so we won't do that. Thanks everyone for joining us, and hope to see some of you at least at some SVC classes down the road.
Awesome. Thanks
That's
for
it.
having me. This was
Yeah.
great.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone. See ya.
Huh.